In 1961, NASA was given 8 years to land a man on the moon, and the first problem had nothing to do with rockets. There was no building tall enough to assemble one, no road strong enough to carry it, no launch pad capable of handling the force of ignition. Before a single astronaut could leave the ground, engineers had to build something entirely new. Kennedy Space Center and Launchpad 39A, carved out of a Florida swamp from nothing. They drove 4,000 steel pilings into marshland, raised a building so vast it has its own interior climate, and invented machines that had never existed before. Every piece had to work the first time. On July 16, 1969, 1 million people watched the proof that it did. I used advanced AI to reconstruct how they built it. This is the construction story of Kennedy Space Center and Launchpad 39A. The problem started with a speech. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and committed the United States to landing a man on the moon before the decade was out. NASA's engineers immediately understood that the existing launch facilities at Cape Canaveral, built for much smaller rockets, were completely inadequate for what Kennedy was asking. They needed a new launch site, and they needed it fast. An ad hoc committee led by NASA engineer William Fleming spent the summer of 1961 evaluating locations across the country and internationally. White Sands, New Mexico was rejected because its inland position restricted launch trajectories. Brownsville, Texas meant flying over populated cities. Remote island options in the Bahamas carried impossibly high construction and maintenance costs. Merritt Island, a stretch of undeveloped coastal land directly north and west of the existing Cape Canaveral facilities in Florida, kept rising to the top of every analysis. It sat close enough to the existing range infrastructure that crews and equipment could be shared. It allowed rockets to launch eastward over open ocean, getting a boost from Earth's rotation, and it had enough empty land to spread facilities far enough apart that an explosion at one pad wouldn't destroy everything else. On September 1, 1961, NASA formally requested congressional appropriations for initial land purchases covering roughly 200 square miles on Merritt Island. 3 weeks later, the Army Corps of Engineers began acquiring the land by purchase and condemnation. By February 1964, NASA had secured title to approximately 88,000 acres. Several small communities and farming operations were displaced in the process. What had been quiet scrubland and citrus groves was about to become the most technologically sophisticated construction site in American history. Everything at Kennedy Space Center was built around a single logistical problem. The Saturn V rocket was 363 feet tall, and it had to be assembled vertically. That meant NASA needed a building that could enclose a fully stacked moon rocket, with room left over for cranes and work platforms to move around it. No such building existed anywhere on Earth, so they designed one from scratch. Planning for what NASA initially called the Vertical Assembly Building, later renamed the Vehicle Assembly Building, or VAB, began in early 1962. The architectural consortium responsible for the design, known by the acronym URSAM, was led by architect Max Urban and structural engineer Anton Tedesco, both of whom had extensive experience with aerospace facilities. The design problem they faced was unlike anything in the history of construction. They needed to build a structure over 500 feet tall on Florida's Atlantic coast, where the ground is essentially a shallow layer of soil over limestone, and the water table sits just a few feet below the surface. The solution started at the bottom. On August 2, 1963, workers drove the first steel foundation pile into the ground. Before the building's frame could rise a single foot, crews drove 4,225 steel pilings down 164 feet to bedrock, then poured 30,000 cubic yards of concrete across the foundation to tie them together. The structure that rose above that foundation required 98,590 tons of steel, enough to build a small city of bridges. The finished building that emerged in 1966 holds statistics that still feel disorienting. 526 feet tall, 716 feet long, 518 feet wide, covering 8 acres of ground and enclosing 129,428,000 cubic feet of interior space, at the time, the largest enclosed volume of any building on Earth. The 4 high bay doors on its east and west faces each open to a height of 456 feet, because anything less, and the Saturn V couldn't roll out. Those doors take 45 minutes to fully open or close. Inside, 71 cranes and hoists move rocket stages weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds, including 2 bridge cranes each rated to lift 250 tons. The building was designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, which it has needed to do multiple times since. A topping-out ceremony was held on April 14, 1965, when the final structural beam was placed. The building was fully operational by March 1966. Assembling the rocket inside the VAB solved one problem and immediately created another. How do you move a fully stacked Saturn V, more than 18 million pounds of rocket, launch tower, and platform combined 3.5 miles across open ground to the launch pad without shaking it apart? The answer was the crawler transporter, and when engineers at the Marion Power Shovel Company in Marion, Ohio finished designing it, the result was the largest self-powered land vehicle ever built. 2 crawlers were commissioned, each 131 feet long, 113 feet wide, and standing between 20 and 26 feet tall. Unloaded, each weighed approximately 5.95 million pounds. The machines run on 4 double-tracked undercarriages, each roughly the size of a city bus, and are powered by diesel generators producing thousands of horsepower. Each crawler cost $14 million at the time of construction, equivalent to well over $100 million today. Marion began building them in Ohio in early 1963 and transported the components to Merritt Island for final assembly in late 1964. Moving the crawlers required a road unlike any that had existed before. The Crawlerway, a double-lane path connecting the VAB to launch pads 39A and 39B, runs 3.4 miles to pad 39A and 4.2 miles to pad 39B. It is 130 feet wide in total. The roadbed is 7 feet deep, layered from the bottom up with graded crushed stone, asphalt, and a surface of Alabama and Tennessee river rock, chosen specifically because river rock does not produce sparks when ground under enormous weight. The grade at the launch pad end rises at 5%, and the crawler's systems are designed to keep its platform perfectly level while negotiating that incline, so the rocket on top remains exactly vertical throughout the journey. Loaded, the crawler moves at a maximum speed of 1 mile per hour, roughly walking pace. The Crawlerway was ready for testing by November 1964, and both crawlers became operational in early 1966. The first Saturn V was moved to the launch pad on August 26, 1967, for the uncrewed Apollo 4 test mission. What I keep coming back to whenever I look at the crawler specs is this. NASA needed to move the most powerful machine humans had ever built at walking pace, and to do it, they had to invent an entirely new category of vehicle and build a custom road just for that vehicle. The crawler was not incidental. It was as essential to reaching the moon as the rocket itself. While the VAB was rising from the swamp and the Crawlerway was being packed with river rock, construction crews were simultaneously building the destination for all of it, Launchpad 39A. The pad occupies roughly 175 acres in an octagonal footprint. Its core is a reinforced concrete hardstand measuring 390 feet by 325 feet, elevated 48 feet above sea level, high enough to protect the pad's underground infrastructure from storm surge and flooding. Construction of the hardstand began in September 1964, with most of the concrete poured by November of that year. Beneath the hardstand, a 2-story pad terminal connection room houses all the electronic equipment routing communications and data between the Launch Control Center 3 miles away and the mobile launcher when it sits on the pad. The room is built of reinforced concrete and protected by up to 20 feet of fill dirt. Bisecting the pad east to west is the Flame Trench, 450 feet long, 58 feet wide, and 42 feet deep. The channel that routes the catastrophic energy of Saturn 5 ignition safely away from the vehicle. At the center of the trench sits the flame deflector, a steel structure weighing 700,000 pounds that routes the exhaust blast down the trench and away from the pad. When the F1 engines ignite, water floods into the trench through a sound suppression system, because the sound pressure from a Saturn V at liftoff is capable of causing structural damage without it. A 290-foot water tower holds 300,000 gallons in reserve for this purpose. The pad also supports a fixed service structure 347 feet tall, roughly a 34-story building, equipped with access arms allowing engineers and astronauts to reach the rocket at multiple levels during launch preparations. A separate mobile launcher tower, rising 320 feet above the platform, traveled with the rocket from the VAB to the pad and provided umbilical connections for fuel, power, and data right up to the moment of launch. Construction of Pad 39A was complete by late 1965. On May 25, 1966, precisely 5 years after Kennedy's speech, a dummy Saturn V designated 500F rolled out of the VAB and made the first journey down the crawlerway to Pad 39A, serving as a facilities verification test. The infrastructure was ready. What remained was the rocket. Everything built on Merritt Island had been designed around a rocket that didn't yet exist when construction began. The Saturn V stands 363 feet tall and weighs 6.2 million pounds fully fueled, divided into 3 stages, each built by a different contractor, each required to work perfectly in sequence. It has over 1 million individual parts, and it flew 13 times between 1967 and 1973 without a single launch failure. The infrastructure was ready. The rocket was proven. What remained was stacking Apollo 11. Rewinding back to January 1969, the components of Apollo 11 were arriving at Kennedy Space Center one by one. The mission's pre-launch timeline reads like a careful, methodical countdown that began 6 months before launch day. January 8th, the lunar module's ascent stage, designated LM5, arrived at Kennedy. January 12th, its descent stage arrived. February 6th, the S2 second stage was delivered. February 20th, the massive SIC first stage arrived. The S4B third stage had arrived in January. Over the following weeks, technicians in the VAB's High Bay 1 stacked the stages vertically, one atop the other, on the mobile launcher platform. The command and service module was mated to the top of the stack on May 5, 1969. On May 20, 1969, 57 days before launch, the fully assembled Apollo 11 stack rolled out of the VAB and began the 5-hour journey to Pad 39A. Engineers conducted a flight readiness test on June 1st and a full countdown demonstration test on June 26th, running through every step of the launch sequence with the propellant loaded. The vehicle passed. The launch team, hundreds of engineers and technicians monitoring thousands of systems from the firing rooms in the Launch Control Center, spent the final weeks verifying every connection, every valve, every circuit between the pad and the spacecraft. The rocket that would carry 3 men to the moon was ready. On the morning of July 16, 1969, the 5 F1 engines of the Saturn V's first stage ignited. 6 seconds elapsed between ignition and the moment the hold-down arms released the vehicle, long enough for engineers in the firing room to confirm all 5 engines had reached full thrust. Then the clamps let go. The Saturn V rose from Pad 39A, carrying Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and Lunar Module Pilot Edwin Buzz Aldrin. Over 1 million spectators watching from beaches and roadsides witnessed the shockwave reach them seconds after liftoff. Not just sound, but a physical pressure they felt in their chests. Vice President Spiro Agnew and former President Lyndon Johnson were among those watching from the VIP viewing area at Kennedy Space Center. The first stage burned for 2.5 minutes before separating and falling into the Atlantic. The second stage fired for 6 minutes. The third stage made 2 burns. The first placed Apollo 11 into a circular Earth parking orbit at 115 miles altitude. And then, after a 90-minute checkout, the J2 engine fired again for 5 minutes and 20 seconds, driving the spacecraft to 24,250 miles per hour and committing the crew to the journey to the moon. Armstrong later described the experience from inside the spacecraft. The Saturn had given them, in his words, a magnificent ride. 4 days later, on July 20th, 1969, the lunar module Eagle descended to the surface of the Sea of Tranquility. At 4:17 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Armstrong radioed Houston, "The Eagle has landed." At 10:56 p.m., he stepped off the ladder and onto the lunar surface. Roughly 530 million people, the largest television audience in history to that point, watched live. Armstrong and Aldrin spent just over 2 hours on the surface, collected 21.6 kilograms of rock and soil samples, deployed scientific instruments, and planted an American flag. Then they returned to the lunar module, rendezvoused with Collins in lunar orbit, and came home. Apollo 11 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969, 8 days, 3 hours, and 18 minutes after leaving Pad 39A. The building they raised from a Florida swamp still stands on Merritt Island. Pad 39. It still launches rockets. SpaceX has been flying from it since 2017. The 2 crawlers are still in service. What was built for Apollo outlasted Apollo, and it is still working. In May 1961, none of it existed. There was no Saturn V, no VAB, no crawlerway, no pad. There was marshland, a speech, and a deadline. The engineers who answered that deadline had no blueprint and no precedent. They used slide rules. They couldn't test anything at full scale until the full-scale version was already standing. 8 years, 1 month, and 25 days after Kennedy spoke, Armstrong stepped onto the moon. A man walked on the moon because someone decided to drain a swamp. If you want to see more of these reconstructions of world-changing projects, subscribe and let me know in the comments what you want to see next.